Hi, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Full Court Podcast with your host, Orazio. So for the first time since the start of the podcast, we're going to go across the ocean to talk about the NBA and the recent trade deadline and updates that might come also after the trade deadline involving international players. And in order to do this, my guest for this week is my good friend from the United States, NBA reporter for Hoopshype, Michael Scotto. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Orazio. It's a pleasure to be on with you, Paisan. How are you?
I'm good, man. Thank you. It's good to have you on board for this podcast because, of course, we're going to talk about the NBA, but it's also good because when I started to write about basketball back in the days now, Michael was actually one of the first American reporters that I was able to connect with through social media and Twitter. We started to have conversation. So it's good that finally, me and Michael, we have the opportunity to chat together also on this podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, it's been a couple of years now, but that's the amazing thing about social media. It connects you with a lot of people, through Twitter and DMs and everything like that. You've been doing good stuff. So happy to be on with you and
thank you, man.
Talk about what's going on here in the NBA lately now that we're past the trade deadline. It was obviously pretty busy, and now, we'll still keep it somewhat busy with the buyout market, but it's a little calmer than the trade deadline.
Yeah. So to start things immediately with you, the first topic that I want to talk about is the Domantas Sabonis trade that happened just before the trade deadline. Sabonis, as you all know, he was traded to the Sacramento Kings. It was kind of a surprising move in a way because, we knew that his time in Indiana could have been limited because there were rumors about the possibility of him getting traded, but maybe Sacramento wasn't exactly the first landing spot that many people believed for Sabonis. Also because Sacramento ended up trading a lot for Sabonis, including Tyrese Haliburton, which is probably the best asset that Sacramento had also going forward in the future. So I wanted to ask you, Michael, what's your view about this trade, and do you think that Sacramento made the right move in trading for Sabonis?
Well, Orazio, when you look at this trade, a couple things stick out to me.
Mm-hmm.
Tyrese Haliburton was clearly one of the best young assets that Indiana could have gotten in a trade for Domantas Sabonis. And around the league and on social media, Sacramento took a lot of heat from fans and other executives for moving Tyrese Haliburton in this trade. But you have to give to get. And they gave up a guy who could be a really good point guard for a guy that's in his mid-20s, 25, and is a multi-time all-star. And for Sacramento, Domantas Sabonis is the best front court player they've had since Chris Webber. I think another thing that was important for Sacramento was moving off the contract of Buddy Hield.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one reason why they were partly willing to give up Tyrese Haliburton in the deal. Now, when you talk to a lot of executives around the league, they were a little surprised because they were told that Sacramento was going to be most likely building around Tyrese Haliburton and trying to get him more playing time. And, I know there were some reports out there about De'Aaron Fox not being available, but De'Aaron Fox was certainly brought up in Ben Simmons trade discussions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if Philadelphia liked De'Aaron Fox, more than some of the other options they had before going, obviously, with James Harden, then De'Aaron Fox wouldn't be in Sacramento. So, I think for a lot of people around the league, it was a trade that clearly showed that Sacramento was trying to get into the play-in tournament and end their playoff drought, which is the longest in the league right now. And they're trying to avoid becoming the longest drought without making the playoffs in NBA history. So there's been a lot of pressure on Sacramento to try to do that. You saw Luke Walton get relieved of his coaching duties earlier this year, and they went with Alvin Gentry. And, the other thing you brought up was with Sabonis maybe not being the guy that a lot of people thought would get traded from Indiana. Before Miles Turner got hurt, there was a case to be made that a lot more teams around the league felt that they could get Miles Turner and that he would fit better with what they're trying to do, because he's a stretch five and he can block shots. When it came to Domantas Sabonis, a lot of people initially thought that Indiana preferred to hold on to him and move Miles Turner instead when they were trying to break up the front court. But Miles Turner's foot injury kind of changed the dynamic of that equation.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we will see what's going to happen in Sacramento, especially if they will be able to finally, as you said, end this playoff drought that they've been in for so many years. And another major trade that involved another international player was the one related to Kristaps Porzingis, who got traded by Dallas to the Washington Wizards. Of course, even in this situation, we knew that Porzingis' tenure in Dallas hasn't been very successful, very productive. Mainly also because of his injuries issue. But the feeling that I got when I saw the reports about the trade of Porzingis getting traded for Spencer Dinwiddie and Darius Bertans, it was a little bit surprising because they didn't get much, for Kristaps, and it looks like they just gave up on him because it just wasn't working, and his relationship with Doncic wasn't really effective. And so I wanted to understand what's your view on the trade, and do you believe that Doncic, not great relationship with Porzingis had his value in this trade?
Well, a couple of things stuck out to me when I saw the trade. First off, with Kristaps, he's been injured a lot, and for Dallas, it was really tough to have him as a co-star with Luka if they couldn't depend on him. They originally, when they got him, had high hopes that he would regain his all-star form when he was with the Knicks that one season, and he showed flashes this season. When he was on the floor, he's been a good player. I think that for Porzingis, I just don't think he's taken that next step. He's been a guy that's a fringe all-star player when he's healthy at times. But I think Dallas and other people around the league have looked for him to become more consistent with that. And so for Dallas, when they made the trade, a couple of things. One, Spencer Dinwiddie was brought there because they have Jalen Brunson coming up in free agency, and they weren't sure if they're going to be able to retain him or not into the summer. And Jalen Brunson is going to cost a lot of money in free agency. He's one of the top players. And on Hoopshype, we did our free agent rankings. Jalen Brunson is certainly in the top 10. Now, with that in mind, Dorian Finney-Smith is a guy that they just did a contract extension with. And the belief around the NBA and talking with, rival executives was that Dallas was going to have to break up one of those two because of the luxury tax. Then they make the trade with Porzingis. Part of the thinking is that it's easier to move and have roster flexibility when you have two smaller salaries instead of one gigantic one. So Dinwiddie was brought there. They had interest in him in free agency. They bring back Dinwiddie thinking that he can play on the ball to take pressure off Luka Doncic at times, and also off the ball as he did in Brooklyn when he played with Kyrie Irving. Spencer Dinwiddie still recovering from his ACL injury. And when he was in Brooklyn, he was a borderline all-star candidate when Kyrie Irving went down and he started in place of him. They're hoping to get that version of him. And when it comes to Davis Bertans, with Davis, it was about adding shooting and stretching the floor for Luka. You know, his ability to shoot the ball is really good, but another player that has also underwhelmed a little bit since he signed the contract extension. So, and the last question you asked me was about Luka and how his relationship affected this. At the end of the day, Dallas is clearly building around Luka Doncic, their franchise icon. And yes, his opinion on these things is going to matter. I don't think that there was any bad blood or not a friendship there with Kristaps. I think that Luka trusts the front office to kind of make those decisions. And ultimately, you know, for them, it gives them more flexibility to make moves in the future. You know, you have Luka Doncic, but who is going to be the co-star? You know, Tim Hardaway Jr. goes down with a big injury. His name had come up a little bit at the trade deadline in some conversations as well. And so I think for Dallas, they're trying to figure out, they've got Luka now coming up on his max extension. How are they going to build around him in the West to give him the best chance in the playoffs? I think for Dallas, they felt like they hit kind of the peak with Porzingis, and they were a good 4 or 5 seed, but it wasn't enough to get them to that next level where they wanted to be. And especially this year, when you're going up against teams like the Phoenix Suns and the Golden State Warriors. So now I think in the summer, you're going to look to see them certainly continue to look to shake up this roster. I think that you're good in the backcourt with Luka and Spencer on paper. They've got to figure out what they're going to do more in the front court. And, you know, we'll see if guys like Maxi Kleber become available. I know a lot of teams around the league like him, but Dallas was resistant to move him. And the same thing with Dorian Finney-Smith. You know, I reported on Hoopshype that they turned down a potential back-end lottery pick for Dorian Finney-Smith, and then they signed him to the extension. They value what he brings on defense as a role player and a 3-and-D type of wing.
Okay. So we just talk about Dallas, of course, and another thing that I wanted to ask you is related, of course, to the future of Goran Dragic, who might be an option also for the Dallas Mavericks here in Europe. There's been some excitement about the possibility of Goran Dragic and Luka Doncic teaming up together again after the great things that they did with the Slovenian national team. It just became official a few hours ago that Dragic and the San Antonio Spurs have officially parted ways after reaching an agreement on the buyout. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think is going to be the future for Goran Dragic? Because it looks like there are several teams interested in bringing him.
Well, right now, so it's Tuesday afternoon. It's about 2:30 on the East Coast time here, you know, and talking with people around Goran Dragic. Right now, he's still going through his options. He's trying to see what's going to be the best fit for him. He hasn't made a decision yet, again, as of this time. With that said, when I look at the teams that could use him, certainly I think the 2 Los Angeles teams, the Los Angeles Lakers could certainly use him. They haven't had any production out of Kendrick Nunn, who they signed with their mid-level exception and has been out with a bone bruise on his knee. You look at the Los Angeles Clippers as well. They could potentially use him. They are trying to compete this year towards the playoffs and look towards the future with that team around Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Other than that, you hear talk about the Milwaukee Bucks as well. Being a team that's interested. They just are closing in on DeAndre Bembry. And, Milwaukee certainly, in my opinion, one of the top teams in the East that could win the entire thing, let alone the Eastern Conference. I think also there was talk too about the Chicago Bulls. I think the Bulls, with Lonzo Ball and Alex Caruso, they're more waiting for them to get healthy. I don't know if that's an ideal fit there. And, the Brooklyn Nets also get mentioned periodically, but, now that once Ben Simmons returns and depending on what happens in New York City with the vaccine mandate for Kyrie Irving, maybe he gets a chance to play in home games. In other states, they've changed that policy. So, there's some optimism and hope within the Nets that maybe that'll happen and Kyrie will be able to play in home games. Certainly that changes the dynamic for them. Golden State, I think for them, it would be a bit of a luxury move. Gary Payton II has been a really good player for them. So to me, when I look at it, I think really the two top teams that need Goran Dragic, in my opinion, are the Los Angeles Lakers and the Los Angeles Clippers. You know, the Milwaukee Bucks certainly have interest in him as well, and they have an open spot. So I look at those teams primarily. Obviously, anything can happen. And you know, money is going to be involved as well. So you have to factor that into consideration. But the biggest thing too for Goran Dragic is he hasn't played in a while in an NBA game since the start of the season with the Toronto Raptors. So he's going to need some time to get, I would say, back into game shape. You know, he's in shape, but game shape is different when you're talking about playing with teammates and stuff. And yeah, Dallas is pretty much a real long shot at this point. I know a lot of people thought for most of the season that he would end up there, but once they got Spencer Dinwiddie, that kind of changed the dynamic there.
Yeah, that's true. And of course, with Goran Dragic, we open up the discussion a little bit about the buyout market, and also here in Europe, there is you know, the wait for some of the EuroLeague teams, the moves that they might make before the EuroLeague deadline for the transfer, which is on February 23rd. And two names that have been brought up often here in Europe are Juancho Hernangomez and Kevin Pangos. Both players, you know, they're struggling to get minutes in the NBA this season. Pangos came up from Europe after a very good season with Zenit. He had plenty of offers on the European market, especially from Moscow, from the CSKA Moscow. And, you know, based on the information that we had here at BasketNews, he is now have kind of an agreement in place with CSKA Moscow for the next 2 years. But of course, first of all, he needs to get his release from the NBA, from the Cleveland Cavaliers, where he's not playing much. And it's kind of the same situation with Hernangomez. This season, he hasn't played very much. He has been traded now several times. He ended up in Utah, but it doesn't look like there is much of a future for him there. And so on this case, I wanted to ask you, what do you think are the chances for these two players to get a buyout, maybe, you know, already in the coming days, and what do you see in their future?
You know, first off, when you mentioned about Juancho Hernangomez, before he was traded originally to San Antonio in the 3-team deal with Boston and Denver, there was a belief from some people around the league that Juancho Hernangomez could have gone to Houston for Daniel Tice. Mm-hmm. And that ended up not happening, but Boston ended up getting Tice anyway, which I thought was interesting. But and also you touched on Kevin Pangos. For Kevin Pangos, he is a guy that right now Cleveland is monitoring what they're going to do. They're going to look at the buyout market and see how they can improve that roster going into the playoffs. When you look at the point guard situation in Cleveland, they've got Darius Garland, Brandon Goodwin, Rajon Rondo, and now Caris LeVert can also handle the ball as well. So for Kevin Pangos, there's certainly going to be what appears to be a limited opportunity there. I really think in that situation, it comes down to whether Cleveland can find an upgrade, maybe at another position to get ready towards the playoffs. And in regards to Juancho Hernangomez, that's the same thing. Now, I can tell you, Orazio, that there are some NBA people that believe Juancho Hernangomez should have a chance to play and get more minutes on other teams in the league. So, you know, I can't speak to the international interest, but both those teams for Juancho Hernangomez and Kevin Pangos, they're monitoring right now the buyout market. And if an upgrade is better for them, if they feel like that, you could see a move. You know, again, Kevin Pangos is really stuck behind a lot of point guards in Cleveland. You know, on paper, it could make sense for both sides. to look elsewhere. And I think when it comes to Juancho Hernangomez, again, there are some people that thought when he was in Boston, he should have got more of a chance to play. Some other NBA executives I've talked to, there's still some people who think that he could help. I think it was just, in terms of him being traded a lot, his contract really made him an easy player to move and put into trades. Now, if he gets a buyout and takes less money and stays in the NBA, I think more teams are going to value him. So I'm curious to see what happens with both of them. Again, both teams are still monitoring what they're going to do. And if they can get an upgrade for Cleveland at a different position, and with Juancho Hernangomez's case, somewhat of a similar position.
Okay, that's great. So we touched basically on every topic that we wanted to talk about it for this week. So for this brand new episode of Full Court Podcast, it's everything for this week. Of course, I want to thank you, Michael, for hopping in and giving your perspective about what happened in the trade deadline and what might happen in the buyout market. Thank you very much, Michael.
You got it. My pleasure, Paisan. Anytime.
And before we finish, just wanted to give you a quick update that Full Court Podcast is now also available in the audio version on Spotify. And of course, the full format of the show is available on our website, BasketNews.com, and on our YouTube channel. So with all you basketball fans, we're going to see you again very, very soon. Goodbye.